Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get everyone kicked off here. So I do already see a question in the chat. How long will the presentation run? This is going for an hour. We will be providing a replay for you. So if you were registered for this webinar series, you will go ahead and get that replay in the next couple of days. I want to welcome you to this webinar series in celebration of our recent publication of our edited collection, The Business of Innovating Online. I'm Dr. Katie Linder. I direct the research unit here for Oregon State University eCampus, and I am thrilled that you're joining us today. I have a couple housekeeping items, and then I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest panelists for today's webinar. First, I think you can all see and hear, so if you are having any issues with the audio, I recommend rebooting Zoom. We do have captions happening on today's webinar. We will also be providing a transcript with the replay as well. I want to thank our co-sponsors for this webinar. We had wonderful partners in helping us get the word out about this particular series. I want to thank our friends at EDUCAUSE, UPCEA, OLC, QM, and WCET for helping us spread the word about this series. For those of you who may have questions about the book raffle associated with this series, that is now done. We did ship out 250 copies of The Business of Innovating Online, and those went out in September. If you didn't happen to get a copy, we do have a publisher discount code, BIO20, which will allow you to get 20% off the book if you are interested in purchasing it. Today, we are using Zoom webinar platform, which means we have a Q&A feature. This should be part of your Zoom screen. It should be a little box that says Q&A underneath it. If you want to ask a question of today's panelists, I would welcome you to use that Q&A feature. It will help me to juggle those questions a little bit easier than if they end up in the chat. So please feel free to ask those questions in the Q&A portion at any time during today's webinar. Okay, so today's topic is about leading innovation on your campus, and I am so excited to be joined by two co-authors of one of the chapters in The Business of Innovating Online, Luke Dowden and Tom Cavanaugh. I'm going to have them give some brief introductions of where they're at in terms of their institutional context, their current roles, and a little bit about themselves. So Tom, do you want to go ahead and kick us off?
Sure. I assume you can hear me? We good?
Yes.
Great. All right. So again, I'm Tom Cavanaugh. I am Vice Provost for Digital Learning at the University of Central Florida in sunny Orlando. I'm responsible for all of our online learning, development and delivery, working with colleges, faculty, and our marketing department for our virtual campus, as well as some folks who handle student services. I'm also responsible for some other areas related to digital learning, including all of our classroom, multimedia kind of AV technology, our mobile app, and learning analytics. And I report to the Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tom. Luke, why don't you give us a little bit of context about your role in your institution?
Good afternoon. Hello to a lot of friends I see in the participant list. I'm Luke Dowden. I'm the Chief Online Learning Officer and an Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Success at the Alamo Colleges District in San Antonio, Texas. And so I have a team that supports 5 independently accredited colleges that are a part of a system. I report directly to our Vice Chancellor of Academic Success. My role is pretty expansive, doing everything from providing instructional design support for the 5 colleges to marketing, to learning analytics and retention and student success studies. So our district is pretty large. We have approximately 62,000 credit students and about 100,000 students once you add in our non-credit in San Antonio, Texas.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Luke. So I have put the contact information for both of our panelists today. It is possible that we will not get to every question. And if you do want to follow up with Luke or Tom, we encourage that. We've also put their Twitter handles. If you want to live tweet anything that's going on in today's session, you are welcome to include those Twitter handles along the way. Okay, so I'm going to leave this up for just a few minutes. For those people who did join us on the first webinar, you may know the structure of how we're doing this. It's very conversational, and I'm going to start out with a few questions for Luke and Tom, and then I welcome questions from the audience based on the topic of today's webinar, which is about leading in online learning organizations. So to kick us off, I thought we would start with just what are some of the characteristics of effective leaders? Tom, you want to go ahead and kick us off?
Sure. One that I was thinking about, kind of knowing that this question might get asked, is a tolerance for risk, and a certain tolerance for ambiguity. We make all these decisions, and some of them are fairly high stakes, because they're involving limited resources, and you want to have as much data as you possibly can to make those decisions. But you're never going to have everything that you need to make those decisions. You try to be as data informed as you can, but at the end of the day, there's a certain element of risk, and if you're not comfortable with that element of risk and a certain level of ambiguity, it's going to be hard to be a leader, because sometimes you have to take a chance and see what happens. And if it doesn't work out, pivot. And Luke and I talked about this in that chapter that we co-authored. Sometimes you have to reassess and pivot based upon the results of a decision that you've made.
Okay, Luke, do you want to give your response to some characteristics of an effective leader of an online learning organization?
We reference this in the chapter, but I think it's important to transparency is important, right? So you want to become very comfortable with sharing your ideas and knowing that it's going to put you in a very vulnerable place, and it's okay to be there, right? The other thing is that, and it's especially something that I've done in my role here in the past 18 months, is that there's a certain ability that you need to gain of getting executive advocates, right? And really developing executive advocates. You need help leading. And I think that as we all study, we learn more about leadership. One of the things that I think is important for me is that I'm not always the best spokesperson, right? I'm not always the best person to represent the good idea. And so the ability to lead through others. And I don't know if I've always done that consciously. I'm probably doing that a lot more consciously where I am in my career now. But I would say that those are two: transparency and leading through others. And the third I would say is empathy. You're going to encounter a lot of different people with a lot of different needs. And you need to make sure that you're approaching your job with a level of empathy for why is this person giving me the feedback that they are in the way in which they're giving it. And so I think those are three very important ones, Katie.
So Luke, I would love to ask a follow-up, because I think some of the things you're emphasizing here is really the relational component of leadership. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about strategies for developing those relationships and maybe even building allies for particular initiatives that you might want to move forward. What are some things that you do in that vein to kind of help with those things?
I think taking time to listen to people, right? That's one. Here, a very important principle that I follow is if I'm invited. And so for our colleges, it's very important to see the support operations team be present on their campuses. So if you had told me when I accepted the position 18 months ago that road showing would be a big part of a strategy, I would have said, no way. Do a lot of road shows. So when we're going to roll out a big idea, like we're going to market programs that are online for the very first time, right, in the spring, we probably did 10 or 12 presentations. That still wasn't enough, but it was the bandwidth that we had. So I think being present and available, and then receiving feedback. I mean, when someone gives you feedback, being able to really listen and value and acknowledge the feedback. And then the topic that I've been talking to my staff about is don't wait for someone to hold you accountable. Share what you've done. So you went out and you told a group of people that you were going to do a certain thing, right? Some type of innovation or marketing campaign or whatever it is. Go back and share the results, no matter what the results are. And I think that those are important things, right? Is that people need to know that you are serious about what you're saying you'll do, and that you're not waiting to be held accountable, that there's a level of personal accountability that you're going to bring to whatever effort it is.
Okay, Tom, you want to add anything here about the relationship building component of effective leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of struck by Luke's comment about kind of working through others, and the art of delegation is something that I've had to learn. I don't think it came sort of naturally. As you kind of work your way up through the ranks, you get good at doing stuff. And then you reach sort of a point where you have to get good at asking other people to do stuff. And you set an objective, you set a vision, you are responsible for providing the resources and the support necessary for them to accomplish that. But you may not tell them exactly how to get there. And that, I think, is an acquired skill, especially for people that are used to kind of rolling up their sleeves and doing it themselves. But at the end of the day, you get a lot more done. There's an African proverb that a lot of people know. It's on the side of the building at the Gates Foundation in Seattle that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that's true because a lot of times you may end up at a decision, or you may end up with an outcome that I probably could have just directed, right? And said, let's just do this, and kind of said, from a position of authority, say, we're going to do this, and everybody sort of grudgingly goes along with it. But if you take the time to kind of build consensus and have people come to own that decision themselves, then you end up at the same result, but now you've got buy-in, and you've got everybody kind of marching towards that same objective, and then having them accomplish those goals through a delegated authority can be way more effective and maybe a little more time consuming, but at the end of the day, you're going to get a lot more accomplished.
Yeah, what Tom is talking about is horizontal leadership, right? I mean, that's the real skill that we have to always work at. I mean, it's something that I continue to try to build is we have to work across departments with lots of leaders and across different organizational structures, and being able to understand relationships and systems and processes. I enjoy that. That brings me a lot of joy. But I agree, Tom, when we see people that are from those different backgrounds or have those different charges within our organization come together and coalesce around getting something accomplished, especially when it's for student success, it's exciting. But it certainly is something that we have to continue to work out.
Okay, so we already have questions rolling in. So one of them is connected to this. So I'm going to go ahead and ask it from John. John says, can either of you provide an example of pivoting that gained executive advocacy for online learning? So this is kind of going back to some of your earlier comments. Do either of you have an example of that?
I have specific examples where pivoting worked, but maybe not tied to the executive advocacy part of that. But maybe what I might say is that, to Luke's comment about accountability, there was a time where the metrics we were measuring ourselves by were things that we established. So how many courses did we build? How many faculty did we train? And those are all good things to keep track of. But those aren't really important when it comes to gaining executive advocacy for accomplishing objectives. What you need to do is tie what you're doing to the president's objectives or to the institution's goals. What is your board of trustees measured by or measured on? And tie what you can do to those objectives and those goals. And then suddenly you start having conversations with executive leadership that get a lot more interesting, because they see you as a solution. They see you as part of the strategy to accomplish their objectives, to solve their problems, as opposed to you just reporting on the number of widgets that you made this year. You're now saying, I'm a solution to student retention. I'm a student to student success, or time to graduation, and all of those kinds of research that we've done here to tie online learning to the big things that, frankly, the state of Florida, where I live, where we have performance funding, it's such a big deal. I'm trying to tie what we're doing to our performance measures.
I would echo that. Alignment is very important. So here we report directly to an elected board of trustees, and our chancellor is given charges. So we have a strategic plan, but he also has a set of 12 to 15 charges. And so aligning to the things that matter and the things that get measured, especially by our community and the representatives, are important. I would say for me, so I was recruited here and accepted a position where I knew that they had some challenges getting started. And there were lots of thoughts about what the unit that I run, which is called Alamo Colleges Online, was. Was it a 6 college? What was it? And for me, a turning point was how I articulated our mission. So our mission is about building the capacity of the 5 colleges to deliver premier digital learning experiences. And the day that I presented it to the 5 presidents, which was 3 months in, was a real turning point. One of the presidents stopped and said, you have me at the mission. I agree with the mission. So I think the messaging is very important as well. So not only alignment, but your ability to talk about how you're aligned. And I mean in an authentic way. I don't mean in an inauthentic way. And I think Tom is like that too. We're not talking about superficial alignment. We're talking about true alignment that you can show how you've contributed to moving that measure. But for me, a specific example was the mission and how I articulated the mission. And I go back to that day and I say, well, that was a turning point for me and for some of the support that I gained that day.
These are such excellent examples. Thanks to you both. I want to remind folks in the audience, you are welcome to ask additional questions in that Q&A feature. So please feel free to contribute those as you have them. So Luke, you kind of alluded to this idea of maybe there are some challenges of leadership in online learning organizations. I'm wondering if you can both speak to that. What are some of the challenges that you think are specific for leaders in our field when we're leading these online learning organizations?
Well, I'll talk about the one that I've faced now, right? As a leader, I would encourage you not to forsake your own professional learning and professional development, especially in our field. And I'll be vulnerable with you and say that, I feel like that's the area that I am affected by most. We talk about this in our chapter a little bit about managing the strategic versus the operational, right? And those get to the heart of the units that Tom and I have the honor to lead. But the other piece is managing yourself and making time for yourself and your learning. And I have supplemented with podcasts. So Katie knows this because I've talked to her about this, that I really had to adapt my learning style and use my commuting time for learning. But for me, one of the challenges I face here, because I'm at such a large scale, right? And I didn't come from a large scale. It was big, but not this expansive, is my own professional learning. So I have to pay attention to, am I making time to engage, right? Am I making time to take advantage of those great resources that are coming out from all of the organizations that we're members of?
I'd like to maybe expand a little on something Luke touched on, which is this idea of managing the kind of the operational versus the kind of more visionary. So, how do you find that balance between the quotidian day-to-day, just I got to deal with this thing in front of me. I got people that need performance reviews and I've got to do this budget spreadsheet or whatever it is, just sort of the day-to-day work that's just required, but also trying to keep an eye on the horizon and see what's coming and trying to align your organization in a way so that you're ready for that. And maybe you can have some influence on that. And that can be hard because I think you have to kind of carve out some time to do that. And I agree with Luke. It's hard to find those times to kind of do your own professional development, your own education. I do the same thing. I do audiobooks and podcasts and while I'm doing other things. I've learned a lot mowing the yard, I got to say. So sort of balancing those two things and keeping the, I'll use another word that Luke used, which is the mission. Keeping the mission front and center. The organization that I'm responsible for, it's a faculty supporting unit. So faculty are our customers. We help them build courses. We help them deliver courses. Even in the classroom technology, it's designed to kind of help serve the faculty's ability to deliver those classroom courses. We don't interact with students as often, with one exception being on our help desk, where people who are taking online classes can call into the help desk. It's the same help desk that helps faculty that are teaching online. So it's really important for us to remember who we're serving. So when we have like an all hands or something for all of the staff, we will bring students in and we will have a panel, or we will do a video or something that that reminds people this is who we're serving. This is, or we have somebody on the video from who's deployed, who's a student taking online classes, just to hear from them. We've had panels of students who need accessibility
Did Tom freeze up, Katie?
I think he did. We'll give him a moment. Go ahead.
I'll pick up on that point in terms of students. We are the only community college district in Texas, and maybe one of few nationwide, that has a student trustee that's a fully voting trustee on our board of trustees. And it is when we do our work sessions around topics, it's very common for us to have students represented. So I think that's important, keeping the mission, and then why are you doing the work, right? And I remind my team and my staff often about that, right? Like, why are we here? Let's not get lost in the day-to-day. Sometimes it's very easy to just get into the minutia of whatever it is that we're working on. And it's good to pick your head up. Our chancellor here, we're very fortunate to have Dr. Mike Flores as our chancellor. He always talks about raising your line of sight. And so for me, it's that check. And for you as a leader, is my line of sight too down, right? Or is it too far up, or is it just about right? And I find that metaphor is very helpful for me, right? Is I want to make sure that my line of sight, am I seeing everything, or am I only seeing what's right in front of me?
That's a really good metaphor. So Tom has left us and will be, I'm sure, trying to come back. So we'll keep an eye out for him to bring him back to us. But Luke, I would love to hear, specifically because our field is so constantly changing and we are dealing with a lot of disruption at our campuses and within the industry as a whole. How do you lead teams in the midst of all of that change? What are some strategies that you might have to lead effective teams in the midst of all of that?
I think expectation setting is very important. I do a lot of coaching, not at the level you do, Katie. I know that you've got specific skill and experience there, but I do a lot of coaching with my team members. But one is about setting expectations. And so as you add leaders within your teams, it's also making sure you're giving the gift of that, right? Is how do your team understand that you're making a pivot in the level of what you expect for them to produce? I had that conversation this morning, right? And for me, and I didn't think I would show this, but I will because it's relevant, it's the big board, right? So it's not only keeping my line of sight, but any staff member that faces my door that walks in can see the big board. I call it the big board, is because this is what's in my line of sight. I want to be transparent with my team about it. If my supervisor comes in, if the chancellor comes in, if a board member comes in, I can talk about any of those items because those are the items it takes to move us forward. So expectation setting, I think, is very important. And when you sense you've pivoted, right, I think to stop and say, well, did I communicate that to anybody? And I'm the world's worst, y'all. I have to have that check on myself is, wait, did I stop and tell them that we're moving in this direction? Or the expectation got kicked up a notch because, no good deed goes unpunished. So when you hit an excellent level or you hit targets like we did this year, then the expectation climbs. So I hope that's helpful, Katie.
I think it's very helpful, and I'm so glad you showed your whiteboard because I have the equivalent in my office as well. And I do feel like it is absolutely an effective strategy for helping to make sure that all the balls are staying in the air and being tracked. That's a huge part of the work, is that we have so many things on our plates, and how do we stay accountable, like you mentioned, to make sure everything is moving forward as it needs to. So that's an excellent kind of practical tip, I think, Luke.
So Tom is struggling to get back in the meeting. He just texted me, Katie. So I don't know if there's someone that can provide support to him.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to let you know.
Okay, I'm going to keep an eye out for him in here if we can get him back. Okay, let's go ahead and keep going, and I will connect with him on the side here. Okay, so we have someone in the chat saying, I'm glad to know several of us are using whiteboards to keep on track. It is kind of an old school strategy, I think, but it's an effective one for sure. Okay, so Luke, we also know, even though the field is changing a lot, it's also maturing pretty rapidly. And even in the past, 5 to 10 years, we've had pretty significant changes. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how the maturation of the field has impacted how you see leadership or the kinds of things that you might want to focus on as a leader.
So I'll talk about it from the leadership perspective, right? There were, for those of you that follow me on Twitter, I was fortunate because, to me, a distance learning legend visited my operations a few weeks ago, in Darcy Hardy. And I think there were these wave of leaders, right, that were the first ones in. They created leadership programs. And I think there was a second and third wave, and I feel like I was a part of that. But I think there's a fourth and fifth wave, Katie. And I'm excited about that for a lot of reasons. One, we know more, right? And we're not trying to prove that that it's good enough, right? That what we're doing, it's, well, how do we make it even better? So that's one. Two, and you know, because I've said this to you, and I'm going to take the opportunity, is I'm excited about the number of female leaders in the field. And I take personal pride in that, and seeing women excel, women become leaders of units. You know, our own Liz Chibochi is a dear friend and a colleague of mine. So I'd look at that, you know, how's our leadership changing, and how are we increasing our diversity, and how does that help us to think differently about problems, right? Because for me, the neurodiversity of how we approach a problem, how we collectively get our minds around it is important. So that's one of the ways that I've seen it grow. I'm curious, Katie, if you would agree or have a different perspective on that topic. But and I think there's some other ways technologically. I'll say this very briefly. I think I'm super conscious about protection of student data and about algorithm bias. If you said what keeps you up at night now that I wasn't talking about 5 years ago, it's algorithm bias, especially with the group of students that I serve. I'm deeply concerned about that. I want to have a conversation about that with anybody that's interested, right? So I would say those are changes that I see.
Okay, and it looks like Tom is back.
Yeah, I would like to add one more characteristic for an online learning leader, and that's flexibility. Being able to restart your browser, and so apologies for that. It was, I was in the middle of talking and Zoom just decided to go away.
That's okay. We welcome you back. What we were just talking about was the maturation of online learning as a field and as an industry, and how that has impacted being an effective leader. Do you want to add in anything about that, Tom?
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting when you look at the growth of online learning and the growth of the kinds of positions that we have. 10 years ago, I'm not sure that there was such a thing as vice provost for digital learning, right? There's a whole new career path, I think, that has emerged for people that are interested in this, that you don't have to be a CIO, or you don't have to be the provost if that's not your path. And frankly, at a school like UCF, I couldn't be the provost. I'm not a tenured professor. I didn't come up the traditional way. I sort of kind of came sideways into higher education. So I think there's a space now that's developing that's value added for the academy, to reach a kind of student that otherwise would not have access to education. And if you look sort of more societally, that's really important. You know, there's a whole population of students that need what we do, and are using that kind of educational opportunity to improve their lives for themselves and their families. So, I mean, not to kind of get too highfalutin on, I think was a more specific question, but I do think that the maturation of online learning has led to more opportunities for more leadership, and to Luke's point, more different kinds of leadership.
Okay, so we do have an audience question that is a clarifying question. Nick asks, what is meant by algorithm bias? Is that something you can offer a quick definition for, Luke?
I'm not an expert, so I'll tell you that. But one of the things I'm concerned about is that people developing the software are doing it from their perspective, and not necessarily considering how a decision about something as simple as a nudge, right, and what the nudge might do or not do in a learning management system or separate from that may affect a student. And I'm not thinking about one company or one product, okay? I'm just talking about in general. There's a person, I just know him by his hashtag hypervisible, that talks a lot about algorithm bias and different bias in our technology. It's certainly something I want to learn more about, but I'm sure there's a lot of people on the chat that can provide a more succinct response. Tom, you may even have a better definition.
Yeah, well, it's something that we're dealing with as well, because we're trying to use data and learning analytics to improve students' success in courses. But we also have a committee, sort of a cross-institutional committee, that's just looking at data, the use of student data, the ethics associated with it. Because there are factors that you can work into your algorithm that, with good intent, could end up having a bad outcome. So some of those are demographic data. You might look at somebody's race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, zip code that they came from, and put some assumptions around them based upon some large data set of risk factors that is completely unfair to an individual student that might be performing in a very different way. So how do you help them but not bias it against them? And individual people, like we've had this discussion, like certain faculty, if they saw a profile, for example, of a student coming into their course before they did a single piece of homework in the course, and said that they've got a 50% chance of failing this course, some faculty, none at UCF of course, but some faculty might just sort of write that student off and say, well, you know what, I'm going to focus my limited time on the students that are going to have a better chance of success. We don't want that to happen either. There's a researcher at Stanford named Mitchell Stevens, and he has a phrase that I like a lot called open futures. And if you're using data, you shouldn't use data to close doors for students. You shouldn't use data to limit opportunities. What you should do is use data to create open futures for students. So if you've got a student that you identify as struggling in a major, for example, and they really want to be that aerospace engineer, and you show them the data, like, look, you're on track to not be an aerospace engineer, but I wanted to, it's my dream. Okay, then let's talk about other resources, some tutoring, some supplemental instruction, some other kinds of things that you can get to maybe help you, and see what we can do to help the student accomplish their goals, not to limit opportunities for them. And the biases that Luke is alluding to can lead to those kinds of closed door opportunities for students, and you want to try to avoid that. And it can be really squirrely.
Thanks, Tom. I agree. And I think, Katie, just to summarize that, just don't lose the people in the data. I shared that this summer with our Institute for Emerging Leaders in Online Learning, is don't forget there are real people behind all of the data that we're consuming.
Yeah, we say that too. Every one of those numbers is a student.
Absolutely. For folks who want to learn a little bit more about this, a book that immediately comes to mind is Ruha Benjamin's Race After Technology. There's also quite a literature on digital redlining, which is very helpful, I think, when thinking about it from the perspectives that Tom and Luke are bringing up here. I see some folks are putting some references into the chat. I welcome that. Thank you so much for adding in additional things that could be helpful for our audience.
I'll add one more. I was part of a group, maybe some of the people in the audience were as well, that attended this session in California, Silomar 2 it was called, and there's a website that kind of has a collection of some of the materials, and Mitchell Stevens kind of ran that. There's quite a few articles and other kinds of resources and some model philosophy statements on how to use student data that's really useful.
Awesome. Okay. So we have a ton of questions coming in from the audience. So I'm going to shift us into those. And first we have one from JJ. How do you find a way to get around barriers to take ideas to the next level of administration and faculty? Any strategies that immediately come to mind?
Well, it can be hard, right? Especially if you get some sort of resistance from faculty or others. But what I try to do, and I'm not always successful, but what I try to do is find kind of what's in it for them. What am I doing that will also be helpful for the faculty? So if I've got this new tool that I think will end up with better student success, well, will it also save faculty time? Will it allow them to kind of be more efficient? Most faculty want students to be successful. They just have a hard time kind of finding space in their lives for that kind of innovation. If I can say that this is going to save you time, then suddenly they get more interested. For administrators, it's again tying to that, to those big metrics. What are they measured by? What are the problems that they're trying to solve? And can what I'm trying to do help them solve those problems? It's a cliche, but sort of the win-win. Can you find a way to align what you're doing in different ways? It's sort of like the 3 blind men who touch the elephant. It's still one big elephant, but if you describe it in certain ways to different audiences, they get a slightly different narrative. And I will pitch projects to different groups to emphasize or de-emphasize certain areas, not lying, but just to sort of highlight the things that they are going to find more appealing, I think.
So for me, I hear myself saying this a lot more often is what's the problem we're trying to solve? So that's the first thing I try to define. Like, I don't want to go to any group and not understand what's the problem we're trying to solve, right? Because you can, the other piece of that here is we have 6 core values as an organization, and one is being data informed. So typically our problem to solve is around some data point or points. So that would be the first one. And then I learned this, and if you follow me on LinkedIn and have read this blog that I've written about asking for help. You know, so we invite people to help us further define the problem and to define solutions. Because we are in a highly decentralized organization, right? But we have an interdependency of being a part of a district. And so there's some consistency that's needed in models. We use a lot of work sessions, right? Do a lot of strategy called charrettes that are used to come to common consensus. But we go in with a clear problem to define. There's a process around trying to solve or do some solutioning. And then there's next steps. So there are definitely some strategies that you can put in place depending on the type of organization, but getting comfortable asking people for help is that simple. I need your help with X. Maybe it's even defining the problem. That would be my hint.
Okay, we did have a quick follow-up for Tom about the conference that you mentioned with the resources. Is that something you can drop a link to in the chat or just repeat what that was?
Yeah, I'll have to do a little Google search to find it, but it's Asilomar, ASILOMAR 2II, was the name of the gathering. And there was a web kind of compilation of some of the documentation that came out of that discussion. It was like a 2-day sort of summit where we just talked about the ethics of using student data.
Cool. Okay. If you could drop the name spelling into the chat, that'd probably be helpful for folks. They can Google it and find it. Okay, so we have a question from Rob asking you each to define innovation in your context and how do you work to facilitate innovation within your organizations?
You want to start, Luke?
So this is a great question because I'm a little stumped, right? The working with on facilitating the change, for me, it's a lot of different stakeholders, right? So if it's an issue like pricing, and I know Tom and I have talked about this over the years, right? You've got to think about who all is affected by whatever change you're suggesting, increase, decrease, you know, or some other investment. So I think you start by who's affected. We've already mentioned the voice of the students. Innovation for me looks really different. I mean, it's not always technology, right? I say very commonly here, we can win on process. And I think there's a lot of process innovation that we can have within my district and nationwide that can remove barriers that we don't even realize exist for students. And so I think for me, it takes on a lot of different forms. Innovation also could be in just how you develop your people and the art of convening and gaining consensus. So I'm not always on the latest, greatest technology. I would like to be, but I'm not always afforded that opportunity. But I think innovation takes a lot of different forms. Tom, I'm really interested in your take on this.
I think I'd probably make a more general definition. I think it's similar to kind of how I define creativity, where it's coming up with new and effective ways to do things within resource constraints, within limited resources. Because if you had unlimited resources, you wouldn't have to be creative, you wouldn't have to be innovative. You could just do things the same old inefficient ways that you always wanted to, and there would sort of be no consequence. But we all have resource constraints, whether it's time, funding, talent, personnel, whatever it is. Sometimes it's political constructs that you're in a particular institution. So within all of those constraints, how can you accomplish what you want to accomplish? And that, I think, is innovative. It doesn't necessarily have to be technology-based. There are innovative ways to do, we were just talking about this here, of doing employee evaluations. HR at UCF is talking about an entirely new way to do HR evaluations, where we wouldn't have an annual evaluation. You would have sort of these continual conversations with people, and it's totally different. That, I think, is pretty innovative, and it doesn't have anything to do necessarily with technology. Now, in our space, technology usually plays a part in it, because it's hard. Technology is really good at helping us be more effective, more efficient, more reach a bigger scale within resource constraints. It's one thing technology is really good at. So in our world, it typically involves technology, but it doesn't have to. It's coming up with new and better ways to do things when there are limitations on what you have available to you.
And Katie, I know we have other questions, but to round this out, for here, where I'm at now, our chancellor defines that. And he says anything that we can do at scale. We only pilot to figure out if we can do it at scale. So for us, innovation has very much a impact driven bent to it, if you will.
Okay, so we have Penelope asking if you have strategies for leading in highly decentralized, faculty-centric environments. I don't know if that fits either of your contexts or if you just have strategies that you think would work well, again, in highly decentralized, faculty-centric environments.
Well, I'm in a Research One university where faculty autonomy and academic freedom is the water that we drink and the air that we breathe, right? So I don't know if I'm completely decentralized because our support services are a centralized support service, but the actual scheduling of courses, the ownership of courses, the hiring of faculty, even adjuncts, all of that is done decentralized within the departments. So what we try to do is say that what we're providing is value-added services, that they understand their subject. They, in many cases, understand how to teach. They are the experts in their disciplines, and we are not there to tell them how to teach, sociology better. What we know is online learning, and we've got people on our staff that are national experts in it, and we think about it and publish on it all day, every day, 24/7, 365 days a year. And you kind of ignore our advice at your peril, right? At the end of the day, you can do whatever you want with your course, but we are here to help you. And if you just kind of give us a chance, and we try to build some credibility through our faculty development processes and people understand what our value proposition is, then you will see that the end result will exceed your expectations, will exceed your vision for what you had for your course, because we'll bring expertise and ideas that you didn't even know were possible because you thought all you wanted was a video. Well, what if you had this interactive crossword puzzle instead? You didn't even know that was possible. But we have these resources and thoughts and things that we can bring to bear that will make the sum greater than the parts.
I would say this is that you need champions, right? You really need faculty champions, or I call them good examples. So both of my last two stops, this one included, I needed good examples. My previous staff knew that it was my goal that we never presented. When we hosted an event, that we had faculty members to present, right? And so I think that's important. Recently, the United Faculty Senate, so that's 5 Faculty Senate presidents, said, we'd like you to come talk to us about what you're doing. And again, when you're invited, go. If you have open Faculty Senate meetings, go. Where the last institution I was at, for half the time I was there, they were open. I went. The other half, they were closed. I was not invited to go. So I would say engage. Don't be afraid either, right? Don't be afraid to be asked tough questions. And I think there's a 3-letter word that's important here, is that when a faculty member suggests something to you, it's not yes, but, it's yes, and. And I've learned that in my communications with them, is that you want to extend that conversation. But faculty champions are important. Finding the good of what a faculty member is doing and having them share their examples.
And this might be more generic kind of response to this, but I think it applies in this situation. And it may be time consuming to get there, but you have to build up a relationship with people. You have to build a bit of a reputation that if you say you're going to do something, you do it, and you're honest with people. And if you do that over time, I think that you build a little bit of a bank account of goodwill so that you can talk to faculty and have a little credibility. And they give you a little more of the benefit of the doubt if you say, hey, here's something we're going to try to get some more people to buy in. And to Luke's point, find those faculty champions, those faculty that are willing to try stuff. And if you can find them who are influencers on campus, you know, senior faculty, tenured faculty, folks who maybe have leadership positions in the Senate or elsewhere, even better. And then what we do is when they have success at something that we're working on, like if we do a little video to kind of explain what we did and how it worked, we don't put any of our staff in the video. It's all about the faculty and what they did. And yeah, they got some support from us, but it's about their accomplishment. We try to put a spotlight on them. And I think that helps as well.
Okay, so questions keep rolling in, and we are in our last quarter or so of the webinar. So let's see how many we can get through. So there was a quick question, Tom, do you see growth in the field in positions like yours?
I do, yeah. So I'll give two examples of why I think that. One is if you look at the work that Eric Fredrickson from Rochester has done, that he's looked at the Chief Online Learning Officer position, even if it's not that title, because he one of the things he discovered was there's no consistent title across the space. But he found, what was it, over 800 different people in those kinds of positions. Now, a lot of them are reaching the levels of, in some cases, reporting to presidents, like a cabinet level positions. I can think of a couple people I know who are in positions like that. And on the other side, if you look at a recent publication that EDUCAUSE did on the Chief Academic Technology Officer, the CATO or CATO, sometimes it's called, there's been a huge growth in that position. Now, they're not always called CATO or CATO on campus, but they serve in that function. And it's sort of like a digital learning chief in many cases. And sometimes they report up through a CIO, which is sort of why EDUCAUSE was doing that. But this was in recognition that this is a new career path. This is a new career path that requires a certain amount of skills. And they found that most of these CATOs reported to provosts, not CIOs. Most of them had terminal degrees. There were way more women in the field than men. It's a fascinating report if you haven't read it. And I think it sort of portends the future of where this space is going.
Yeah, I don't know if innovation officers are in that group, Tom, or if they're in the Cato study, but you know, I've seen the growth of those positions as well. There's chief online learning officers, there's the Cato, but then there's also this the innovation leader that I've seen emerge as well.
Okay, we also have another great question. Given that there is a whole generation of new leaders in online learning at universities, what advice do you have on the best ways to develop relationships with more traditional leaders across campus?
So I'll take this. I had last institution, I had one administrator that had a very prolific career in politics before joining our institution. And was really good at the position that the individual was hired at, but I never could get their attention. Never, ever could get their attention. And I got very interested in the things they were interested in, which were finance. I don't have an MBA, I don't have a business degree, but I had to become very fluent in talking the financial operations, right, of our institutions, which is something that we normally don't do on the academic side, right? That's the side I grew up on. I think that you would be wise to find out what interests them, what are the metrics that they're having to watch, and become fluent in those. And that was a real stretch. You know, we talk about stretch goals. That was a real stretch for me. But it's something I enjoy now, right? And it's a competency that I've gained in trying to understand how does the business, right, of online learning work, and how does it fit into the overall business side of the organization. So I think you have to engage people in the metrics that they're required to follow. If you can figure out what those are, that would be my advice. It worked for me. It took me 6 years. It took me six and a half years, but you know, I stayed at it. So I'm not saying it's a short process. Tom probably has some better advice.
Well, I won't elaborate too much because I think that's a good answer, but I do think about the way I talk to trustees is different than the way I talk to faculty. And it's not that I say different things, but there's a level of granularity that I go into with faculty, because when I'm trying to convince them of something or make a point or share something with them, a lot of these people are scientists. They want to see the data. So I want to go deep with the data with them. Board of trustees don't want to see that level of data. They want to see more summary, executive summary data, and kind of understand insights from that data. So trying to kind of tailor how you speak to different audiences to make sure that you're giving them what they need for whatever decision making that they have to make. I think that can be hard sometimes.
Okay, we have a question from Rolando. What happens when your pace of innovation exceeds the organization's capabilities? Any thoughts on that?
That's pretty much our world, I think, both of us. It's hard to sustain that, right? Because you'll end up with staff turnover and things if you push too hard. We say this in the chapter. In fact, I have it here. So keeping your edge, the art of being stretched. I think it's a good thing to be just slightly uncomfortable, but not so much that it's it hurts. You don't want to stretch so far it hurts. If you are never stretching, you're not growing, you're not improving, you're not innovating, you're not trying to find new ways, because the world is changing around you and you kind of have to keep up. But if you stretch too far, if you innovate that in a way that exceeds your capabilities, you're going to put too much of a burden on your staff, and people can sustain that in short bursts, but over time, if you're just always asking people to work late nights and weekends and this is your life, and it's just, people are going to burn out.
And I would say to you that you want to become resource minded, right? So I'm always thinking about what are the other resources I'm going to need. I'm very oriented that way, is that one strategy sets up the other. But I also am okay to reprioritize. So give yourself permission to say, I can't do that right now. I mean, there is something that I want to do so bad right now. I want to do it for 18 months and I just can't, right? I'm not going to share what it is, but it's this innovation that I just want to go down that road, and it's a 3 to 5 year road. And I think you have to become okay. And, we showed our walls, is I know on that wall what I can give up, right? I know what I can't pursue if I don't get the resources that I need. But I'm balancing that against what's most important for my customer, which is the student. So it goes back to mission, and does it put the student in the best position to succeed? Okay, that's top of the list. Does it put faculty members in the best position to succeed? That's the next one, right? So there's a set of non-negotiables, but there's also, I think there's a resource mindedness. Where I came from, we had a business plan, and we knew at certain metrics we would do certain things. And the best, most mature operations have those, right? So they built in some of the decision making. They didn't have to think about when to hire an instructional designer because they built it into the model, right? And they normalized some of the needs that they would have when they hit that next horizon. And that's a lot harder to do, but once you have that system in place, then that's really what gets your flywheel, if you will, going. Sorry, Tom can see my excitement because we're starting to talk about financial models and how we sustain the pace of what we're asked to do.
So that is actually very tied to the next question. As I ask it, I'm going to go ahead and share the panelists' contact information again for folks who maybe didn't get their question answered today as we're kind of wrapping up. Please feel free to reach out to them. But this final question, or maybe we can squeeze in one more, but the close to final question is about finances. How do you set the right expectations with potential executive advocates around the cost and investment into online education required to make it successful, but also gain buy-in from them when limited resources or budget might be their primary focus, especially in an increasingly competitive marketplace? I think this is on all of our minds. Tom, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I operate in a pretty big scale. We've got 70,000 students this fall at UCF, and last year we did 47.5% of our credit hours online or blended. So it's a big deal. And I can point to that scale and say we're mission critical. but I still don't have the resources I need to do everything I want to do and feel like I need to do. So I'm constantly trying to make arguments for resources. I mean, I'll kind of go back again to the tying it to the institute. I sound like a broken record, but tying it to the institutional mission and what is your president, your board measured on, and can you be a solution for that? Also, I think for online learning in particular, there is a way to, I would encourage you to get in touch with Luke because he's the spreadsheet king. If there's a way to do a pro forma that shows that this investment will have this return, then it gets really hard to say no to that, because you're not asking for a handout. You're asking for an investment. You're not asking for an expense. You now become an investment that has a predicted return that can be reinvested in online, but also a piece of it can potentially be siphoned off to do other interesting things at the university. Maybe that's even, depending upon your particular mission, scholarships or other kind of things that will benefit students.
Well, Tom alluded to it. So his response was a great setup. You notice he knows his numbers. So part of the buy-in is Tom knows the impact that he has at UCF. I know mine as well. 7,512 students are 100% fully online across our 5 colleges, right? That's 1/5 of our total full-time population, or approaching it. And that scale matters, right? So knowing your data and your own impact is one. And I would start there, right? I mean, there are things I don't know about our impact that I would like to know. The other piece is the financial piece of this, and I can't get away of that. What's the cost of doing business, right? What is it? Because I think we have a very skewed view of revenue over expenses across online learning divisions. I don't think we as an industry have a consistent handle on what our return on investment is to the organization. And I don't mean in just quantitative ways, I mean in qualitative ways. How are we improving instruction across the board? So someone that goes through Tom's training at UCF, right? Tom, I'm curious if y'all have done this study, but won't put you on the, so what's their impact in the other types of classes they teach? Do we
we know that. Yeah. I mean, we know it anecdotally even.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think of impact, right? And start to, what is my impact? And define what that looks like. And you can do that through a financial model, or you can do it through impact studies around certain investments, or where you make your name at the college and or university, and how that helps in other areas. I think there are real ways to do that. And I'm happy to talk to you offline about some of those.
Okay, so maybe unintentionally, maybe slightly intentionally, you both have queued up a perfect segue into talking about the next webinar in this series, which is about innovative financial models for online education. And this will be taking place in early December. We are trying to avoid the majority of the conferences that everyone is attempting to go to this fall. So in a little over a month, you will be able to join us for this. If you have already registered, you'll get a reminder with a link to come to this webinar. You can also register for this third webinar if this is a topic that has piqued your interest on our website. And if you cannot find that, please let me know. Happy to show you where that is. I want to thank everyone so much for coming today to today's webinar in celebration of our book, The Business of Innovating Online. I also want to thank Luke and Tom so much for their contributions to today's webinar. And we will again be sending out a replay. So everyone who registered, since you're here, you're going to go ahead and get an email about that replay. Please feel free to share it with colleagues. And if you did happen to miss our first webinar, the replay is also available for that. And it'll be included a link in the email that you'll receive following this webinar. So thanks everyone so much for joining us. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you at our third webinar in the series in early December. Have a good day, everybody.